Romans were going where the metal was. They were keen to get it, and there was a lot in this area. And this is where we find this strong tradition that the Romans were there. And here they have the Roman bridge. This is Fortingal. This is at the entrance of Glen Lyon. Fortingal in the Gaelic, Fortingal, it means the stronghold of the strangers. The question is, who were the strangers? Galloway means the land of the strangers. So the strangers equate to the Gael. And here's the famous Fortingal yew tree. Some of you will know about it. It's reputedly the oldest living vegetation in Europe. It's now believed to be 5,000 years old. So it's 3000 BC, which is contemporary with the stone circle, what we just looked at, which is just a few miles away at Croftmore. So this was 3,000 years old at the time of Christ. When they measured the girth of the tree about 1770, it was 56.5 feet. It's a huge tree. Subsequently, the youth around about the late 18th century were lighting Beltane fires. In the centre of the tree, they burnt the centre of the tree out, but it's still there until like 2 pieces. But despite all that, after 5,000 years, this tree is still thriving. So the big question is, why was it planted there? And what's giving it its life force? Why is it still thriving after 5,000 years? And it's in this particular Fortingal Glen Lyon area where there are so many interesting connections. At the time of Christ, the Scots king, called Metellanus, that was the Latinized name. In the Middle Ages, when they came to write down the history from the old Gallic records, they wrote it in Latin. So Metellanus was the Latinized name of the king, and the clues in his name, Metellanus. The guy was very much involved, according to the old Scots chronicles, in mining. He was one of the wealthiest kings of the time, and he had his seat here at Fortingal. Just behind the yew tree, on a slightly elevated hill, there's a hill fort called Dungiel. It means the White Fort. And white in ancient times was synonymous with spiritual or holy. That's why the Druids wore white, the early Celtic monks, the Chaldees, wore white, the Essenes wore white. So white is significant with holy, with spiritual, but it can also imply spiritual power. This fortress could be a sacred power point. And that obviously, if the king would have been advised by the Druids, which he would have had in his entourage, they would have known where the power points were. So if he's going to have a fort, to have his seat, from whence he's commanding out, from his radiating out, from the area, tribal area that he sort of reigns over, he's going to pick a power point, the White Fort, Dungiel. And those of you that have looked into the French connection and Rennes-le-Château, so-and-so, what do we get? We get Blanchefort, the White Fort. It's a power point. So Metellanus was the king at the time of Christ, and there's an interesting local oral tradition that a relative of King Metellanus was none other than Pontius Pilate. And that's a bit of a blockbuster when you start getting your head around that, because there's nowhere else in Europe or the UK which has an oral tradition saying that that's the birthplace of Pontius Pilate. And yet there's a strong oral tradition in this remote region in the Central Highlands of Scotland that Pontius Pilate was born at Fortingal and related to this king. He was of Gallic royal ancestry. And he just happens to turn up at that key node in human history, the crucifixion in Palestine.